Good morning, everybody. I'm Tim O'Brien. I am the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, and I am joined today by two of my colleagues, Mary Ellen Klas and Frank Wilkinson. They are both veteran political observers, veteran writers, and very smart people. And we will probably not surprise you with the topic we've decided to discuss today, but that is whether Joe Biden, will the president stay in the race or won't he? And what should we think about the very robust, conflicting, confusing, troubling, and enlightening discussion around all of this that has followed his disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump recently? So we'll jump right into it. Joe Biden is very firm about where he's headed, and that is to the Democratic nomination and a face-off with Donald Trump come November. And let's take a quick look at the president's appearance on Morning Joe, in which he discussed how he's thinking about all of this.
The bottom line here is that we're not going anywhere. I am not going anywhere. I wouldn't be running if I didn't absolutely believe that I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024. We had a Democratic nominating process where the voters spoke clearly. I won 14 million of those votes, et cetera. So I not only believe that from the beginning, but I wanted to reassert it and demonstrate that it's true. And I'm going to be doing that all through this week and from here on.
Well, he couldn't be any clearer about that. And we'll dig into some of the particulars of this as we go on. But Mary Ellen, tell me, what do you think of I don't know the right word to describe it, defiance, stick-to-itiveness, obstinance, optimism, however you want to describe where Joe Biden is right now. But what is your reaction when you see him making a statement like that on national television?
Well, I think that despite some of the ovations that have happened behind the scenes, he is aggressively showing that he is not willing to go. And in some ways, because the clock, both, metaphorically in terms of where we are on the election cycle, but also his own physical clock isn't getting any slower, and it's only going one direction. I do think that he is almost trying to run it out. I think he's trying to run out the clock before the Democratic convention, before it's impossible to do anything else. And that's appears to be the strategy.
And is that a wise strategy in your estimation?
I think that there is a lot of criticism that they are not listening to the public. And it's very evident that the public thinks that he is too old to continue in this job. However, we also know that his rival is even more dangerous. So, that's the equation they have made, and I think it's really unfortunate that we are in this position now. And I think we got a reprieve when he gave the State of the Union address, and it seemed as though he was vigorous again, and the doubts were subdued. But I think it was a scripted performance, and right now it's very evident that he's doing very few unscripted, lengthy performances, and that raises all the doubts in Americans' minds.
Mary Ellen raises a lot of great stuff there, Frank, and we'll return. We have so much to dig into here, but let's set all of this in the context that Joe Biden is running against the twice impeached convicted felon in Donald Trump, who also faces a number of ongoing prosecutions. He's also been convicted of sexual assault and on and on and on. He is hardly a normie, and everything he said about his intentions in this race are a threat to, I think, civil society and democracy. We'll get to that too. But how do you see Biden situated in this very unusual, historic maelstrom?
I think it's all about risk. It's all about risk assessment among Democrats right now. Is it riskier to remove the president? And if you remove the president, how do you do that? I think what Biden was doing, I agree with Mary Ellen, what he was doing was saying, I am raising the risk level if you try to push me out. I'm going to resist. You don't know exactly how hard I'm going to resist. So what he wants is a basically unsustainable level of risk for Democrats trying to remove him. What Democrats are grappling with on Capitol Hill right now today is how much risk they are willing to take on, and then the cascade of risks that follow from that. It's not just, do we push Joe Biden to get out? How do we do it? If we do it and we succeed, what do we do with Kamala Harris? Do we then go to this, James Carville idea of a sort of mini primary? Do we anoint her as the successor? There are so many different decisions that flow from the first one that it's really a cascade of risk, and Democrats have to weigh all those risks. And of course, there are different risks for different individual Democrats based on their own elections. So it's an incredibly complex series of decisions.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Joe Biden's state of mind in all of its dimensions right now. But the first instance I'd like to discuss is the letter that he sent to Congress yesterday. And I'm gonna read parts of this as a departure point for us to consider. And Biden was responding to the myriad calls from outside the party that he stepped down, and from calls from some corners within the Democratic Party that he stepped down. And Biden wrote, I can respond to all of this by saying clearly and unequivocally, I wouldn't be running again if I did not absolutely believe I was the best person to beat Donald Trump in 2024. And then he goes on. Do we now just say this process doesn't matter, that the voters don't have a say? I decline to do that. I feel a deep obligation to the faith and the trust the voters of the Democratic Party have placed in me to run this year. It was their decision to make, not the press, not the pundits, not the big donors, not any selected group of individuals, no matter how well-intentioned. The voters, and the voters alone, decide the nominee of the Democratic Party. How can we stand for democracy in our nation if we ignore it in our own party? I cannot do that. I will not do that. Oh, wow, I think I said at the top of the show, there's a lot to unpack just from the opening thoughts about what we need to discuss here. There's a lot to unpack in this letter. To me, one of the things Biden is obviously doing here is he's saying, I'm going to ignore everyone but the voters because the voters already nominated me. And therefore, the calculus is simple. I'm the nominee and I will run in November, and you have to live with it, whether you're a member of the press, all three of us being guilty, or a member of the Democratic Party or anyone else. The trouble I have with that formulation is that the voters spoke before his debate. And I think Biden's performance in the debate was so troubling. He lost his train of thought. He could barely be heard at different points. He often didn't offer effective rebuttals to the stream of lies Donald Trump presented on the stage during that debate, et cetera, et cetera. And it was, I think, in a lot of ways, such a monumental moment that you have to imagine it did cause a lot of voters to recalculate whether or not they could continue supporting him, whether or not they wanted it, or whether or not they wanted another option. And he's sort of, I think, saying in this letter, Mary Ellen, that doesn't really matter. That forget all the other noise. I've decided the voters already spoken. There's no reason to revisit what the voters think, and I'm staying in the race. But that's my interpretation of it. But I'm interested in yours.
I agree with it completely. I mean, I think that he is saying in this letter that I alone can win. I alone can fix it, right? And that is obviously consistent with somebody who has perhaps, for what we do not know, whether his performance on debate night was, a one-off, which they seem to say was just a bad night, or is this something that happens on a regular basis? And only he and his closest circle obviously know this. And so it's consistent that if he is thinking that I can perform and now and then have a bad night, then the letter makes complete sense. But he can't reverse what Americans saw. And what we saw was somebody who had a health event on television. And the question in many people's minds is, how often will this happen as we go forward? And it's not about, as much as I think he absolutely needs to be commended for the performance that he has had in saving this country and restoring so much. What he has done in the past is not what we're voting on. It is what he's going to do in the next 4 years. And the New York Times editorial today actually doubled down and brought up the quote from, the Wall Street, when it comes to markets, past performance is not evidence of future behavior. And I just think that is something that Americans are clearly aware of.
Frank, Biden, when Joe Biden says he believes he's the best person to beat Donald Trump, there's a track record there. He obviously did beat Donald Trump in 2020. And he was the person voters, I think, decided then was the best person to take them across a bridge away from the various authoritarian and racial and social obscenities that Donald Trump had introduced during his first term. And so he can point to that. But again, I feel like the Joe Biden of 2020 is not the Joe Biden of 2024. And if he could lay very visible and tangible claim to the idea that he's the best person to beat Donald Trump, did that change with the debate, Frank? And what is your thoughts about how he laid out his argument in that letter?
Well, let me take the first part, which is right now, Joe Biden is not running to be president. Joe Biden is running to be the Democratic nominee campaigning. His job is not being president as far as Democrats are concerned. His job is to be the campaigner in chief, not the commander in chief. He is failing at campaigning, and that's what we saw in the debate. He was unable to articulate exactly why Donald Trump is such a dangerous figure. He was unable to articulate why he is a vastly superior candidate. So if you're not able to make that argument, how are you able to make the argument that you are the right person to carry the campaign? It's a very difficult thing. Now, that was a 2-page letter, by the way, getting back to the letter. You read the part that was fundamentally the argument, which is the voters have already decided. They voted for me, and that's a legitimate argument. Okay, that, he's gotten millions of votes. He defeated minimal competition in the primary. He was chosen by the voters. Very solid argument. The problem is that, life has changed dramatically, or we wouldn't be here discussing this. The debate changed the terms. The debate changed, it elevated concerns that people had across the board. And what you have now is the votes that Biden has gotten versus the polls that indicate that voters, including Democratic voters, have serious concerns about his capacity to both govern and campaign.
Frank raised that the specter of polls, Mary Ellen. I have a tortured relationship to polling, political polling. It can be a useful yardstick in certain circumstances. Frank has a lot of direct experience as a veteran campaigner with polls and their utility or lack thereof. There have been a lot of post-debate polls, Mary Ellen, about Biden. It's clear that the debate cost him lots of favorability points, that people lost confidence. Other polls have suggested, however, that despite the debate debacle, he has closed a gap with Trump, particularly in the handful of swing states that are likely to determine the outcome of the election. in a way, polls are held out there as this abstraction that exists beyond the noise of pundits and party loyalists and just gets into the minds of voters. How are you thinking about polls right now as they pertain to Biden's viability as a candidate?
I think I agree with you on sort of the difficulty of understanding polls in this era right now. I'm not sure how well we have mastered the art of polling in an era where people no longer rely on telephones to reach them. But we have what their value is, a snapshot of the moment. And it's very clear that right after the debate, people were enormously down on his performance, and he definitely lost some traction. Since then, with his aggressive defiance and willingness to fight, there have been some polls that have tightened. And I think that is an interesting issue to explore. And it's probably exactly the kind of thing that is giving the fuel to his argument that he needs to stay in. And that is that even if we have a choice between a competent, good person on the decline and an incompetent, immoral person on the decline, people are willing to go for the former. And that I'm wondering if that is going to sustain. I don't know, but what we have right now is simply where people are in this moment.
I want to remind all of our friends joining this live stream today that as we can, when we can, we'll happily we'll look at some questions from our audience and we'll put them in front of our smarties here to try to answer them as best we can. Frank, any further thoughts on the utility of polls in this moment and any kind of faith you're putting into them as guideposts?
Well, look, there's no question that polling has gotten more complicated. There's also no question that politicians are still relying on polls to guide them. And what you have to look at here are not just Joe Biden's polls. I mean, we have a highly polarized country. I don't think it was ever likely that the bottom was going to fall out of Biden's support, because a lot of people who support Biden realize that the alternative is Donald Trump. So there's Biden's polls, but there are also the polls of senators running for re-election in swing states. There are polls of House members running for re-election in swing districts. Those are very important polls right now, because as the Senate Democrats and House Democrats meet to discuss this, those people are going to be kind of the fulcrum in the discussion. Is Joe Biden more of a risk to them than changing horses in midstream? Where are they seeing their races? And, from what I have been hearing, you don't see it so much in the head-to-head. You do see it in the favorability ratings, and you just have to go by history. And when a presidential candidate is not performing well, and I don't think you can say that Joe Biden is performing well in the polls now. He's not. But when that's the case, invariably in the past, that has dragged down candidates for Senate and House.
Well, and let's depart onto that. The fact that there could be a down ballot tsunami of problems for other Democrats running in the Senate and the House because of Biden's belly flop in that debate should be part of the calculus for Biden. It's not clear to me actually that it is. And what that would present if in fact Biden ended up losing the presidential race and then Congress was firmly in the control of the GOP, and really a GOP that is now firmly incented by MAGA and Trumpism and Trump's stewardship of the party now. It would give him a very unified legislature to back what appears to be a very unified approach to the presidency. I know it's hard to get into anybody's head, but Frank, how much of a factor is the down ballot impact of Biden's candidacy a factor in Biden's own mind right now?
Well, it doesn't appear to be a big one. I mean, politicians, especially politicians who run for president, are not known for small egos. My view, actually getting back to that 2-page letter that he sent to congressional leaders, I thought that was a very aggressive and defensive letter. It was not showing someone who thinks he has a strong hand. His goal, as Mary Ellen said, is to delay, delay, delay. It's a little bit like Donald Trump's criminal trial strategy. He wants to delay the reckoning, and with each day's delay, he raises the price of removing him. He raises the risk factor. That's what his strategy is. How much he is thinking about down ballot races, I can't tell you. I'm not in his mind, but he's very clearly thinking about his own race. He's very clearly thinking that he does not want to step down. And so he's taking the steps to undermine any movement to remove him.
Mary Ellen, Biden has a very long, honorable record of public service with significant contributions to the American public and his own adherence, I think, to his own civic, political, and moral code. And in his autobiography, he talks about various moments throughout his life where he suffered setbacks and he got back up again. And he uses that phrasing, get back up, whether it was being teased as a child about a disability, his stutter, whether it was losing his first wife and one of his children in an automobile accident, whether it was various electoral setbacks, whether it was his initial setback in the 2020 campaign when he came out of disastrous primary tours in Iowa and New Hampshire, and then went on with Jim Clyburn's help in South Carolina to win the Democratic nomination that year and defeat Donald Trump. And I think part of his spirit now is I have overcome and I've overcome. And he's pointed to that specifically in some of his recent statements, despite the naysayers. But again, I want to return to this idea that the Joe Biden of his childhood or the Joe Biden of his early political career, or even the Joe Biden of 2020 is not the Joe Biden of today. And do you think how much risk do you think he's recognizing in his own candidacy?
I think Frank raises the point that he's very defensive. And so that is an indication that he sees some risk. I agree with you completely that he is going back to the, Scranton Joe is a scrappy fighter kind of image of himself. And he has proven that image time and again. But the problem we have is exactly as Frank was pointing out, and that is that he's not the only one on the ballot. And the implications of his position there and the questions that voters have in their minds has a down ballot effect that is potentially the thing that will make Joe Biden's legacy Joe the loser. And that is, he can, I think you're right. I think his instincts are to fight, that he believes he can do it because he sees himself achieving every day. But as all of us who've had parents who've aged know that the decline is slow, and the people around him and even you don't often recognize it yourself. But for those who are in and out and see him like we do, that is the most disconcerting thing. And so I think what's been really interesting to watch is the people who, not from the comfortable races, like the Black Democratic Caucus in the House yesterday met with him, came out with a message, we're behind him. But it's the moderates, it's the people who are kind of on the ballot with a potential competitive challenge. They're the ones, you've got people coming out saying, we want the strong, like Senator Mark Warner, we want the strongest path forward. People who are arguing that they want to be able to win. And if Biden's going to stay in this race, they're very fearful they will not. And so he can fight, but that's only going to help him. And he's got to look at the greater good here, I think.
Frank, the mechanics of all of this are pretty messy, both at the nomination level, and just in terms of the delegates that are firmly in Biden's control right now. If Biden were to step aside in favor of another candidate, what would that look like?
That's a question I can't answer, Tim. I mean, I know you're not supposed to say I don't know.
No, I love that, actually.
I don't know. And I honestly
because it would be so anarchic.
Well, not necessarily, because obviously they know that they have to structure this decision in such a way to limit the chaos, right? But you can't ignore the fact that this is uncharted territory. If, for instance, there was a real solid consensus that Kamala Harris was the horse everybody wants to get behind, it would be a different situation. That would happen, I think. There are concerns about Kamala Harris. Not everybody loves her. Some people have doubts about her. Others think she's exactly what the party needs and that she will create a really distinct contrast between a 21st century Democratic Party moving forward and a 19th century Republican Party looking backward. And I think there's a strong argument for that. But not everyone is comfortable with her. That decision is out there in the ether after previous decisions have to be made. So it's very, very difficult, I think, to look at how this is going to unfold, because, as I said, it's kind of a cascade of risk assessment. And you can't just make one decision. You have to follow a decision tree and let it flow down. And I don't think they've gotten to those decisions yet.
Mary Ellen, do you think of this as chaotic? And if Frank and I are lost in all of this, can you be the guiding light and tell us exactly how this machinery would function if Biden were to step aside?
You know, I think we should look back at what the whole point of political parties are supposed to be. And, you know, they are to be, they're not just the machine that is the entertainment platform for the people at the top of the ticket. They are designed to bring people together, to coalesce behind a candidate that is going to bring our country forward and strengthen us as a nation. It's quite evident the Republican Party has failed us when they nominated Donald Trump in 2016 and continued to nominate him the last, 2 election cycles. They have failed, but the Democratic Party still has the potential to show that forget about the clock. They can get their act together, that they can persuade Joe Biden that the best thing for the country is to rescue this platform, rescue the Democrats, find a way forward that Americans can now redeem their sense of hope. And I just think that, yes, it's extraordinarily difficult. The Republicans have already threatened a lawsuit if anybody other than Biden or Harris is on the ballot. We can, I think that Americans know that we have the ability to think quickly and move quickly, and why not give it a try?
On that note of optimism, I'm going to have to call the clock today. Mary Ellen Klas and Frank Wilkinson, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg Opinion's live stream. We do these every Tuesday morning at 8:30. We'll be back again next week with another installment, and thank you all for watching.